I wasn't very clear in the beginning in terms of who I am, what I stand for, what the business plan behind it all was. And the weird thing that I noticed was that the more podcasts I did, the more clarity I got. Meaning that the more I created in the marketplace, the more feedback I got, but also the more as a creator or as an entrepreneur, the more ideas started to formulate.
Hey everyone, welcome to Fingerprints on Success. So glad you could join us. Today, I was joined by Jay Wong, who's the founder and CEO of Podcast Your Brand, a marketing agency that empowers CEOs and ambitious companies to launch and grow profitable podcasts. Over the past few years, Jay and his team have made an impressive impact working on over 250 top 100 podcasts and driving more than 50 million in new revenue for clients by seamlessly integrating podcasts into their marketing and sales engines. Known for their unique approach, Jay and his team guarantee a top 100 podcast on iTunes within the first 90 days of partnership, a service that has positioned them as industry disruptors in the fast-growing podcast market. Their roster includes major players like Procter & Gamble and numerous companies on the Inc. 5000 list, all of whom have experienced increased sales and retention thanks to Podcast Your Brand's results-driven approach. Beyond work, Jay is a dedicated real estate investor, an avid runner, and a world traveler with his wife. You can learn more about him and his company at podcastyourbrand.com. So let's unravel the fingerprints on success of Jay Wong.
How you been? I feel like we haven't caught up in just a little bit.
No, we haven't caught up in a while. Yeah.
It's gonna be
I've
fun.
been great. I've been doing great. Yeah, no, it's, for law firms, it's that time of the year. Well, it's always busy, but, when you're running a law firm, I'm at that time of the year where I've got to not only doing strategic planning for the end of the year and for next year, but got to figure out, what's, how are 225 people going to get bonuses and what are their raises for next year? And, or are there people that are going to be promoted and all the stuff that goes with running a business and of a reasonably decent size. It's a very busy and stressful time of year. So lots and lots of conversations that have to take place and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah,
So
it feels like it's busier internally than externally, if that makes sense. I mean, it's just a busy Q4 is just a crazy time.
Yeah, and in the legal world too, depending on like what type of space you're in, like if my space that as a lawyer is transactional, so the end of the year tends to be incredibly busy for us because people want to get things done.
Sure,
especially in an election year when there's uncertainty about what the tax code could look like,
right,
going forward. What you got now, you don't know what you're going to get months from now. So
right.
if you have a chance to get a deal done with certainty of how it's going to be handled and treated, now's the time to act. So in an election year, we get even more end of the year intensity than you would maybe even find in a typical end of the year. But whereas litigators, though, judges like to take their vacation and, so courts tend to get really quiet at the end of the year, whereas transactional people get crazy. So, yeah.
The election's impacting a lot of things. That's for sure.
It is going to be, all right. So I'm an old political science major, right?
Okay.
So for me, so I find politics to be like a sport for me. I look at it a little bit differently than the average person. I don't get all crazy about it in a political way. I get kind of excited about it, almost like the Olympics happens every 4 years. A presidential election happens every 4 years. I'm there with like some good snacks and a good drink, and I'm watching the drama unfold. And I have my candidate, but I'm almost just as equally interested in the drama of the evening versus like the outcome of the game.
Sure.
Of course, I care about the outcome, but I find it to be wildly entertaining, like what's going to happen, and what kind of drama will there be and how close or how not close will it be? Who knows? But, so for an old political science guy, this is like the Olympics every 4 years. So anyway, so my night will be blocked out. There'll be some snacks on the table, maybe a bottle of good wine, and I'll just kind of take it all in. I'll stay up way too late. and the
Yeah.
next day I'll be semi-worthless. So
Yeah. It's kind of like the Super Bowl weekend and then the Super Bowl Monday afterwards, where it's definitely not a holiday, but there's kind of like an unspoken rule on that Monday where people definitely stayed up way too late.
oh yeah.
Maybe had just indulged a little more than usual. But
Well,
I've always found that interesting with American
I
politics
kind of,
too.
yeah, I think so. And I kind of suspect, if things go the way like pundits think, I kind of suspect that
Sure.
you'll be, if you go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning Eastern time, you will very, very likely not know who the next president is.
Right.
I think if you wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning Eastern time, you may
Yeah.
still very likely not know who the next president is.
Wow.
I suspect there'll be some states that be important that might be so razor thin that they have to do recounts. And um, if it's razor thin, and by the way, it's not just a Trump thing. If it's razor thin, if it's not going the way of the Democratic Party, they will file
Yeah.
lawsuits. If it doesn't go the way of the Republican Party, they will file lawsuits. I read some
Oh my
pieces that
goodness.
each party has like over 100 election lawyers already on retainer and already preparing for the post-election disputes. So
Ready to go.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, this is crazy town right now. So which makes the drama even better. But enough about me, Jay Wong. I have to say, this is going to be the most stressful podcast I've done
Come
to
on.
date
Come on,
because
though.
yeah, because for all my listeners out there, they're going to get to know you for the first time, but you're the guy that I came to help build this podcast. As the CEO of Podcast Your Brand, you're the guy that helped me create all this. So now I actually have to interview you, and that's a little stressful. But I think, for our listeners, I think, I've already kind of given away a little bit that fact that, you helped me build this podcast, but, tell everybody a little bit about Podcast Your Brand and just kind of, the journey on like what drove you to build this business and how did you do it?
Bill, key thing for all great podcasts is to simply have fun, roll with the conversation. You do such an awesome job of that already, just from the guests that you bring on. So I know it's going to be a super fun interaction. I appreciate you having me on. The biggest, it's an interesting question because you asked me, how do we get started in this? And I was at a dinner actually a couple weeks ago where this question kind of came up of like, what inspired you to kind of get rolling in your business? And we had different people kind of share, people that were in e-commerce, people that were in retail, people that were in, other agency or other services. And, for me, I never set out to build an agency. It was not on the top 10 goals lists. It was not
Right.
on the affirmations or the manifestations. It wasn't necessarily in that, but I think so many times as young entrepreneurs, you start understanding and seeing feedback back from the market. And so what I mean by that is I had started my own podcast back in 2016, 2017, and we had growth hacked the show so that it actually did relatively well. I think in our first year we had over I want to say 200,000 downloads, and so it wasn't crazy, but it also wasn't. I knew I had did something right. We had built up a little bit of an audience from it, and that engagement, that feedback constantly in terms of, hey, what do you want to hear? What can we create to add more value to your life
Yeah.
as a listener? There's
At
no
that
business back
time,
then.
yeah, at
Yeah,
that time though, so you're creating a podcast,
yeah.
you know, did you even other than saying, "Hey, I want to have a podcast," did you even really have like a lot of knowledge about how to do it, or did you kind of figure it out because you decided you wanted to have a podcast?
So I had tested other mediums. It's a great question because I had tested other mediums, meaning I started blogging, you know, um, I also did vlogging, the video version of a blog, right?
Okay.
And this is before the time of having nowadays a lot of thought leaders or personal brands. You'll see they'll have like almost like a camera crew with them, and I'm sure
Sure.
we've all seen your favorite thought leader or influencer, and they'll have that. But there was a time in YouTube where people still do vlogs. They still do day in the lives of content. So I tested out blogging content, tested out Instagram, kind of like quote cards and things like that. Instagram was very different back in 2016. Vlogging, I just found that podcasting fit. Like there's just something that drew me to the medium. There's something about the long form aspect of it, something about the rawness of the conversation, something about I think it also works in a lot of our favors as if you're a high quick start, you know, just a reference to the Kobe index. If you're really good, just like on the fly, and you also, I needed less prep. I found with like some of the interviews, and I found sometimes the more prep I did, the more stiff I got. And it just wouldn't come out like we're trying to do YouTube videos and but follow the script and try to memorize the script,
Yeah,
and
I'm
it
kind of
just
learning
didn't.
that. I'm learning that like as I build my podcast and do more and more episodes, I'm kind of learning like, some of the better ones have been the ones where I didn't have time to prepare and I was like on the go and I was like, oh God, I got this interview coming up in 10 minutes and I'm logging
Sure.
on and then afterward I'm like, oh, that was really good, and I
Yeah.
wasn't really ready for it. So
Well,
kind of
and on
interesting.
top of that, Bill, that's so it's also relatable. You know what I mean? It's one of these things where it's so relatable to anybody else because who else that's watching this or listening to this also feels like they don't have enough time in the day, right?
Yeah.
Also, they might be going from meeting to meeting, and sometimes they're really prepped for one, but maybe not as prepped for the other. You know, and I think sometimes it's a little bit like life. Life gives you opportunities to kind of show up as your best self. And in some cases, especially with like a format like podcasting where it requires you to be present and kind of listen and what have you,
Yeah.
the best thing you can really do is just lean into who you really are. Right. And so going back to your question, I actually think I wasn't very clear in the beginning in terms of who I am, what I stand for, what the business plan behind it all was. And the weird thing that I noticed was that the more podcasts I did, the more clarity I got. Meaning that the more I created in the marketplace, the more feedback I got, but also the more as a creator or as an entrepreneur, the more ideas started to formulate, right?
Mhm.
And you know, without getting into the super deep into all the different things that we tried that did not work because there were so many of them.
Sure.
All the different experiments that we would try different boot camps. We had an online program, online training. At that point, and this is all just feedback. People said, "Hey, I
Yeah.
wanted to learn more about personal development with you. I wanted to learn
Yeah.
more about leadership. Can you teach me the leadership aspect of
Yeah.
things?"
Well, I could
Right?
tell you, having been a lawyer to entrepreneurs for 26 years, I've yet to have an entrepreneur sit with me and say, when I look back, it just all went exactly. Everything we tried was spot on. Everything we tried was right. We really didn't make any mistakes, and I really wouldn't change anything. Yeah, I've got zero of those in 26 years. So,
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think about I love this quote from Jim Rohn where he says it's don't wish it was easier, wish you were better.
hmm,
And I think during those years, there's a couple years that we were going so hard, so consistent with the podcast that was kind of like the mindset as well as, hey, I'm going to try a lot of different things like affiliate marketing or getting sponsors for the show or what have you. You just didn't know a number. I just didn't have like a business plan per se. But one of the feedbacks that came back was we started having business owners and entrepreneurs reach out and say, "Hey, I see what you're doing on the show. I'm a big listener. I'm a big fan. I love you having certain amount of guests on the show or these types of guests on the show, and I'd love to do the same. I'd love to learn how to launch a podcast." Right. So back then it was actually more around. There's way less information these days on how to actually even like the tech aspect of launching
Yeah.
the podcast, right? And so we did trainings all around that. We had at one point we were doing these 2-day intensives in Toronto. So we had business owners from US and Canada fly into Toronto, and I would just try to teach them everything I know in 2 days, right? Which sounded really great on paper, but if you've ever actually done that, it's super overwhelming, for
Yeah.
you and for the person. But
Yeah, it's like an information download where your head's going to explode after 48 hours. Yeah.
I'm teaching them literally everything I know, from building opt-in pages, building email lists, creating social, assets from it. And so it was so many different topics. It was well beyond the podcast, right? Well beyond just how to conduct an interview or how to show up or what's your 3-point lighting setup. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was beyond just the podcast content. And Bill, I think you'll appreciate this. One of the attendees came up to me at the end. She runs a real estate investing kind of firm, actually here in Toronto, and she said, Jay, I really appreciated all the effort, the wisdom. I could tell you put so much heart into sharing everything.
But
But I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not doing any of this. I will not do any of this. In fact, I'm going to literally leave today and not even look at the pot. Like, you've made it very clear for me that I'm not going to execute on any of this. Right. And so, we kind of had a back and forth, and I was kind of feeling very disheartened,
right.
by the,
Glad
by
that
the
her
conversation.
check cleared.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, she's in and all that. But as she turned away, she said something that really changed how I started understanding about all these things that I was telling you about, personal development, feedback, and all these things. And she said, Jay, just as a thought, just so you know, I like you so much that I'd write you a way bigger check than whatever you charged us to be there. I think it was like 1,000 or 2,500, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
I'd write you a way bigger check if you could figure out and have a process where you could just do this for me, do all these things for me, and I just show up and I just want to do the podcast aspect of it, right? And I didn't understand. I actually didn't even understand what she meant. I was like, what do you mean? Like, you don't want to understand how to, like, what about like
Nope.
logging in over here, and like what about the stats over there? She's like, no, I don't care about any of these things, right? But what I do care about is getting results from any of the things that I invest my time and energy into, right? As a business owner. So she's like, anyways, I got to go, so she's like on her way out. And it really stuck with me because I thought, wow, here it is. And, I kind of waved it off in my mind. I was like, well, I don't really want to run an agency. I don't know anything about running an agency. I don't know anything about running team and operations and all these different things. But I realized it was no different than anything else that you haven't done before, and up until that point, I had tried so many different things that did not work, and almost in part of my mind is like, well, what's really another thing that might or might not work, right? But on top of that, the big kind of like takeaway for me, I know, we share a love of strategic coach and Dan Sullivan.
Absolutely.
And I remember one of the key aspects of his teaching is this concept of the biggest check, right? And so she, that one last thing, I went back to her. I said, hey, just out of curiosity, when you said that you'd write a bigger check, like, are we talking, what kind of,
how big?
What range? Yeah, how big are we really talking, right? And we went back.
If I could do this, and this for you, what would that be?
Yeah,
worth?
like what would that look like? Silly, as a first time, entrepreneur, in the agency space, I threw out a number. She immediately said, "Oh yeah, yes, easily. I'd write you a check right now. Like, send me the wire details, and I'll send the money over." And we had a couple cases like that, but that really started the agency in a way, right? And
Well, she effectively gave you a business plan, right? She basically
we
said,
built
like,
it
this
off
doesn't,
of,
what you're doing doesn't work for me, but this would.
yeah. And Bill, you'll appreciate this as well, because what I discovered in that process is a lot of things. Meaning, I figured out what type of business owner we really, really could get a big result for, right? Because anybody who's ever sold any type of training or courses or tried to teach other people anything online, the biggest frustration overall is that you have to build a big volume of people because 90% of people can't take action on any of the thing that you tell them, right? And a lot of times it becomes disheartening in a different way where you go, this knowledge is so great. I can't believe you're not. I'm giving you as many of the things that I want you to execute on, but I forget what the stat is, but like it's a similar stat of like how many people give up on like their New Year's resolutions, right? Before February. It's like
Yeah.
2/3 or 80%, something astronomical that you wouldn't even believe. So like 80% of people, just using that number, can't even follow through on a goal that they set for themselves. 30 days later, they're back doing the exact same thing. So the chances of them really taking in new information and executing exactly the way you wanted to, very, very slim, right? And it takes a very specific type of person to go through that. And what we found was through the agency, we can control the results a lot better because we were essentially offloading all the tricky aspects off of our partners. And I can actually get them to just do what they love doing, which a lot of times is showing up, right? Being great storytellers, controlling the narrative in terms of their topic, but being able to also be present with who they're creating content with, like this in this interview. And that's like the fun part, you know? And so it also created this element of like, well, how do we make it fun? How do we make it easy? Right. And how do we make it lucrative? You know?
Yeah.
And
It's not
so
unlike writing a book, really. The way, like, I can only speak as not just I'll take off my interviewer hat, right? And
sure, yeah.
I'm like Bill the client. I I would never have gotten this far and never have executed if I had to know all the stuff that you taught at your first, going back to the beginning when you were teaching a course. Like, the whole beauty of it was, if I could learn how to do interviews and and interact with people and enjoy that process, everything else was done for me. And it made it, the ability to actually have a podcast became real. And I think it's very similar to people who want to write a book. If you're going to be the person who sits down and puts every letter on a page and writes the entire thing and figures out how to organize it and figures out how to edit it and get it published and all that. I mean, it's already rare that people write books, but that just takes the number down dramatically. But if there's a company that will help you write it and help you publish it and edit it and print it and get it out into the stream of commerce and do all those things for you, much higher percentage of success for execution in writing a book. So to me, the experience has been very similar. So, that the woman who said she would write a much bigger check, she definitely got you going in the right direction. That's for sure.
And one of the biggest things we also stopped doing at that time, and I know a lot of entrepreneurs in their journey, at some point they probably make a mistake similar to this, which is they start having different offers, different services, right? They start being everything to everyone, right? And it's because it's what it's effective when you're in a survival, type of stage in your business, when you're just starting out, and you'll take any. Sure, we 100% know how to do that, right? And you just kind of figure it out along the way. It's great when you're starting out, not great when you're actually trying to build something like a brand or build longevity in a business, right? And so through that experience, we actually learned that we actually weren't serving the right types of people through the different offers, weren't getting the right results with them. And on top of that, it split my focus as a CEO and as an entrepreneur. And so when we started the agency with just a handful of clients, very quickly it became the only offer, the only service, the only business that we wanted to really, really drive home. And even today, I get asked all the time, "Hey, will you come? Will you do a training for us over here? Will you do any of these things over here?" And very rarely do I ever say yes to these things, because I know that's not necessarily how I want to serve in the greater scheme of things. And I know we can get the right results with the right types of clients that are willing to put in the work and willing, just like yourself, willing to just show up and say, "Hey, we might not have the best skill set today, but I'm willing to be present and build up the right skill set with you. Right. And that's really
Yeah.
what you would ideally want in every business is working with the people that you get the most joy from.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting how you got to where you are now. And, I mean, how many podcasts have you been a part of, right? That have you helped launch at this point?
So the agency, we were actually trying to count this because we're doing a different experiment on some of the ads that we're putting out. But somewhere in the range of 230 to 260 for the agency that we could. That's kind of what
Right.
we've done over the last 5.5 years. So many more that we don't include from the courses and training, because there's always that top 10% of people
Sure.
that actually they just need a little bit of information, and they're gonna win, and they're gonna implement no matter what, with or without your help. So those people, there's so many shows that had launched from some of the trainings. But yeah, about almost, we usually say over 200 shows that we've personally have launched in the agency, which is obviously something we're super proud of.
Yeah. And in only 5 years, that's a lot of shows to have created. Um, yeah, that's pretty remarkable, actually. So let me ask you this too, like scaling. Everyone loves to talk about scaling, especially the people that are the listeners for our show, because they're all entrepreneurs for the most part. And everyone's always thinking about how do you grow it? How do you build it? Because you're a perfect example of someone who has significantly built a business in a relatively short period of time. How did you scale?
It's one of
I don't
these
want you to give
things
up all your
where
secrets, but just maybe the high level stuff.
I mean, it's like the fundamentals, right? You ever hear like when professional athletes, how like it's like everybody needs a coach, right?
Yep.
And even professional athletes, they have a coach. That's kind of the whole. There's a big part of that whenever anybody's selling you coaching, right?
Right.
And
Football,
it's
for
true.
example, is blocking and tackling, right? Blocking and tackling. And baseball is, look the ball into the glove and point where you're throwing and, like the basics, the stuff that you got to do right in order to perform.
And especially if you look at the coaching, they usually just get the professional athletes. Yes, they learn some very advanced things and some trick plays and certain things like that. But most of the time, like I would say 70, 80% of the time, it's getting them to practice the fundamentals to the point that they don't just know the fundamentals, like they operate with the fundamentals in place, right? And I think scaling a business is very similar in the sense that it's about simplicity over, complication. I think it was Da Vinci that had that quote that like simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Meaning, if you know the topic very well, you can easily, in one or two sentences, boil it down to the nuts and bolts, right? If you don't know
Mm.
the topic very well, you can talk about all sorts of different aspects without actually hitting the key root of the issue, you know. And so for us, it's a big work in progress, even for us, because what got us to it's the same idea, right? What got you to call it six figures in the early days is certainly not what gets you to seven figures to a couple million
Right.
dollars. What got us to a couple $1 million is definitely not what works to get us to an eight-figure enterprise or beyond, right? And what works at 30 million or 50 million does not scale to 100 plus million, right? And you hear this adage, this idea all the time. So for us, we really focus on a couple things, which is the right people in the right seats. I've made
Yeah.
so many hiring mistakes, and I'm sure so many of your listeners that are veterans in building business, they understand what I
Right.
mean. And
Including the host, by the way.
yeah,
Yeah.
right people, right seats. And
Yeah.
even more important to that is like, I would have thought this was super boring, like in the very beginning, but I've really understood in the last little while the importance of hiring for culture, like culture fit and core values, over just having massive talent, over having a team of just lone wolves that are amazing, that have like a bazooka level of of execution
Yeah.
and can do amazing things, but when you're not operating, especially in an agency or a service type of business, right? You need to operate as kind of like more of a team than just one specialist, you know? And so that's been a big learning, for us as well. We've made tons of mistakes in hiring, but a lot of times that's correlated to the core values and the culture fit. How clear are you, in those aspects? And I
So
think
let's
one of
talk about that for a second. Though I don't mean to interrupt you, but like you mentioned culture, core values a couple of times. I was just saying
yeah,
to someone the other day that this, in my mind, there's certain like descriptions that over time get like overplayed, over mentioned, right? Like for example, in my world, people started years ago referring to themselves as trusted advisors. Like you were a lawyer, you were an accountant, you were a financial advisor, you're a trusted advisor. And people would say, "Oh, you describe yourself," and you'd say, "Well, I'm really a trusted advisor to my clients." And it was like it became the most overplayed thing ever. And I find that, and by the way, I'm a huge believer in powerful culture and core values and finding those right people, just like you described. But I now find that every person I talk to talks about, well, our culture is really unique. Our culture is really different. Our core values, but like it break that down for a second, right? Like in your world, what does that really mean? Like when you like who is that person? Who is that person that, without saying, and here's our 5 points
yeah,
of our
yeah, yeah,
core
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
values. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean, because we did the exercise that every CEO does, in the sense that, like, hey, what's your mission statement? What are your core values? And then
Right.
I did what I think a lot of people do in the beginning, which is I came up with the core values,
Of course, I did the same thing.
Yeah, right. And then I went back to the team at some point and I said, guys, congratulations, we now have core values, and they're like, oh, great. What are these? And I'm like, well, this is how we're gonna operate, essentially, moving forward, right? And so I found that didn't work as well, because it was one thing that I like. It was essentially just a exercise that Jay did randomly over a weekend, or during the course of a week or so, but it didn't actually represent the team. They didn't create it with me, and thus it was really difficult to actually hold them to that, because they didn't believe it themselves either, to a certain degree, right? And so that was the first version of what we would create. But I think a big part of it is, one, do you create it as a team, right? So all of our core values, we create it as a team, and we talk about that in our weeklies, our quarterlies. And people bring that up. People celebrate other people in the team. So I'll just give you an example. Sometimes we have this radical accountability is one of our core values. So we have set meetings, but you can think of them as weekly meetings or even daily meetings. I don't do them daily with the rest of the team, but there's a section in that meeting where we celebrate, hey, who's really exemplified a core value that you saw, right? And somebody said, hey, you know what, Bill, I saw Bill address this one problem, and there was a great aspect of actually taking accountability for what went wrong, right, or what didn't work. And he showed up in the core value way. So we have a essentially, like, our team, we have a way of essentially enforcing that within ourselves, without kind of like, making it such like a grading process, if that makes any sense. you
Yeah.
know
No, it's like your own formality to it. It's interesting. Like I said, I'm a big believer, and I think that for a lot of entrepreneurs, I know, like for myself, part of core value is like, and you're gonna laugh, but I look at, is this a person that I would actually want to go to dinner with at night? Is this a person that if I had to
it's a
sit in
good
a three
barometer.
hour, if I had a 3 hour ball game that I had to sit through, would I have fun sitting next to them for 3 hours? Like, would that be a painful 3 hours, or would I be like, I'd go to a ball game anytime with this person? Like, because I feel like if somebody's smart and they've got that, you can kind of teach them anything, right? But and then if everyone can kind of be yes to that kind of analysis, the odds are you're going to have a great culture. Because in a way it's like, although it's not like formal, it kind of gets to the root of what are core values, right? It's like-minded people that are on a similar journey, that view the world in a similar way, that view human relationships in a similar way, and I don't know, like maybe I'm like so old school that I'm missing something, but I mean, how much gut is in your decision making, I guess, is my question. How much of it is like where you just get a sense that like this is a right fit person?
Yeah. No, I look, I think you could do a lot of these things on the front end, but I think it still boils down to some of these what you're saying. It's like, hey, they could be incredible. They could be an amazing culture fit. They could, sound like they fit, all the core values, tell you amazing stories about how they do it. But if something feels off in the interaction, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? If your spidey senses are tingling a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with podcasting in a way. It's kind of like, and sometimes we seem a bit upfront or direct when we say this, but it's like, Bill, were you bored in the interview? Like were you kind of looking at the clock and kind of
Like,
thinking, what am
oh,
I
half
having
hour
for
left.
lunch? Yeah, like are you counting down the minutes? Because if you are, if you're bored, imagine the listener,
Yeah.
right? So it's like one of these other barometers. There's you probably know this. There's this concept called the four referability habits. Okay. And there is one in there that it's a very basic one, but it says say please and thank you, right? That's like another one that I didn't really understand until you start having people in your organization that's not actually what they do, right? They just don't say please and thank you. Like it's just not. I don't know. They just kind of miss that part, or they're just not. Same
Right.
thing applied for clients,
They didn't
right?
listen to mom and dad when they were kids.
Yeah, and it's very subtle. It's very nuanced because you go, how do I judge? Like, what am I gonna like have like a thing where like, oh, they said thank you there. That's +1, right? It's like it's not like a counter that you could really train, but it's something that you start looking for. It's these very nuanced aspects, I think, of the person. Um, I mean, we're still trying to get better at it. I think one of the greatest gifts though in what we've been able to because we've worked with so many different brands on their show. I've gotten to read so many different books. I've gotten to understand people's topics at length. And you can, and as you know, in the business world, this topic comes up so often, and a lot of
It
people will
does.
cite, hey, I built up exited a 8-figure or 9-figure organization. And my secret to success is core values, is the fact that everybody wore blue and we believed in this and this was like our battle cry, and you're thinking, was it really that, or was it maybe the sales system? Was it the
Right.
lead system, right? Was it on any of
Right.
these other processes?
Was your
But
product or service so good that people were going to buy it no matter what? Yeah.
yeah, so it's definitely something I'm still trying to get better at, trying to learn and be a better person. I would say that's the other aspect too, not just like is the CEO living the core values or what have you, but I'm sure you're aware of this, which is the business can only grow to the level that the CEO is willing to grow, not the business but themselves.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think
Can you walk your talk, right?
yeah, and it's not just, I don't mean in what you specialize in, meaning like in your aspect, it's like, can you be an amazing lawyer? No, you're already an amazing lawyer. That's why, you're doing what you're doing. But it's also, are you representing, just because I tell them the core values, am I a good reflection on those? Number one,
Right.
right? And number two, am I, if I want everybody trying to get better or focus on personal development or what have you, am I showing up as a leader in that right way? It's making that, I think for me, what's been tricky was like making that transition of like helping other, instead of being like the superstar, or like, I always think of like business is stuck at a certain, range. And I was in there for a while where it's like you have to put on the Superman cape, and you put on the Superman cape, and guess what happens? You become Superman and you could do anything. You could solve any problem in the company, right? The downside of that is the company can't really grow because you become the bottleneck.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so it's
that's a
helping,
huge point.
right? It's helping other people on the team discover their own superpower so they could put on their own cape, they could create their own solutions, right? It's actually helping people be better, to be leaders in their own department, right? And so but that takes it's less on the skill of doing that and more, I think, on the leadership of the CEO themselves.
Yeah.
So it's
Wait,
something I'm still working on, but yeah, those are, some ideas that come to mind.
yeah. In fact, leadership is such a huge thing in entrepreneurship. Also, one of my favorite episodes that I did was it wasn't even like an entrepreneur per se that I had as a guest, but I had a captain from the USS Enterprise, a career person in the United States Navy who was, chief officer on deck of the USS Enterprise. His name's Ty Aldinger. It was one of my favorite episodes because the whole thing was about leadership, right? How do you get people to follow you? How did you get thousands of men and women to listen to everything you say, not just because of rank, but to respect you enough to do it, and he talked about empowering people and giving them the tools, and just it was a really cool episode. So and it's amazing how like leadership just tied into everything that my listeners, they weren't career military people, but understanding leadership and hearing his stories was really cool. Do you think that like there's certain, I mean, in the early stages of your entrepreneurial journey, right? You built a really successful business and company. You keep growing and building. Do you think there's like mindsets that you've had or kind of philosophies that if you were to reflect on it, you'll say, because of that or that way of thinking, I think it's helped me a lot in being successful.
The mindset, what comes to mind is failing faster. Like it doesn't matter if you make mistakes or you fail, but it's actually, it matters more that you fail. You need feedback faster. So if you're going to launch something, it's better to launch it without over dressing it up. Just kind of like test out the idea, do it in a very bare bones, like minimal effort, but like you're getting the feedback, if that makes sense. So that's been a big, anytime we've tested out new offers or new services, that's, or even like right now, we're revamping how we're running traffic and what have you, but it's a big idea in testing out ads and testing out headlines. Instead of making a beautiful polished video talking about the idea and having all the different effects and the b-roll and the sound and the lighting's perfect, right? Why don't you just throw it up on a post-it note, just the headline of the idea, right? Is
Mhm.
that headline getting clicks? Are you getting people opting in just for the idea, right? And I think it's that kind of mindset that like allows us to test faster. And the other one, it's less on the business and entrepreneur side, but more on the category design aspect of it. And so even just going back to this idea of like throwing out a headline or what have you, I think for one of the things we've noticed with our business and with every business that we've gotten a chance to partner with, it's the ones that have a very, very good category that they can dominate, that they can own, right? Those are usually the businesses that are not just sellable or not just really great on the back end of things, but their marketing. Everything is so much easier when they have that category of one idea really built in. And so for us, it's this idea of profitable podcasting, right? It's this idea that we don't believe podcasting should just be content and we're just throwing out random ideas week in and week out, but it's more intentional with how that company is selling, right? Could we create episodes that are addressing beliefs and objections, to the core services and core products of that business, right? Could we integrate the podcast in more creative ways in how that business is marketing themselves, you know? And so that idea is just an idea, right? I mean, we have a
Yeah.
whole process to execute on it, but that category design, that category of one, what and at least in marketing, it separates out the businesses that kind of like the shows and the businesses that kind of like fit everything else, as opposed to like they actually have a whole category and idea that they represent.
That's really cool. Can you give me an example of that? Like just like in execution, like how how that's working for like a client of yours, like where you took that approach and it's like blossoming into something kind of, growing or cool, or that's like where you're like, wow, that idea on the Post-it, this is playing itself out now. Like, can you give like a little example? Because I think entrepreneurs would love to hear, like, okay, in real life, here's one where this is working.
So one of the first one that came to mind is one of our partners, Cameron Harold. And I'm sure, some of your listeners might or might not be familiar with him. He used to be the COO of 1-800-GOT-JUNK before
Oh
they
yeah.
did their first exit, or, how I know it's still around, but him and Brian are essentially not involved in that business any longer. So this is a while back, but when because of his COO background, he decided to start a business teaching operations, because that's what he knows, right? It's teaching other CEOs how to find and onboard COOs. So it became this like operator integrator type of training, which I
Hmm.
know we've seen so much of, right? In just like the whole coaching and training space. When it came to, I think the brand was doing well, but it was doing well because of Cameron, not because of the idea. It was just doing well because he himself could rely on his experience. He could speak to it. But one of the tests that we started testing out with the content in general was this idea of making the COO less just like the second in command, or the or a very valued member of the team member, but in Cameron's world, they are the superstar. They are the the CEO. They are the visionary, if that makes any sense, because that's what makes sense in their business, right? And so there's this idea of the chief behind the chief, right? The
Hmm.
superstar behind the actual, or behind the superstar, the actual superstar, right? And so this idea, we made it. You could look up the podcast. It's called the Second in Command podcast. But the tagline behind it is training the chief behind the chief. It's
Interesting.
training the actual superstar behind the CEO. And so that verbiage or that language, it came from the community, but it also came from us testing out, and them testing out this message through different ads, or through different marketing channels, that it resonated at a deeper level with the COOs. And now they just don't think of it as, I need more operator training, or I need more business training, but it's, how do I become the chief behind the chief? How do I step into
Yeah.
a hero? How do I become a bigger leader within the organization?
Yeah, well, you nailed it. That's taking someone from an operations like kind of vantage point to a leadership vantage point. And as a CEO, that resonates with me because that's I've got a lot of great people that support what we do, but getting people to be the leader behind the leader, that resonates with me. So if I were your test market, I it would have been singing to me. So so you got about 10 years, I guess, right, since you kind of launched this, right around 10 years, I think,
The
if I did the
eight,
math right.
so in podcasting, almost probably, getting close to 10 years. Agency, believe it or not, only 5.5, 5 years or so.
Okay. So if I were to ask you, I guess similar to the positive side, on the negative side, right? When you look back and reflect, and I know that you're always involved in self-improvement. You and I have talked about strategic coach a million times and how great that is, and other people. Like, what would kind of Jay Wong today tell Jay Wong 5 or 10 years ago? Like, okay, don't do this. Like, this is not going to go well. This is stay away from whatever this is. What would that be? Or is there
For
more than
people,
one thing?
yeah, for people that are viewing this on video, I'm stressed by this question, because there's so many, when you look back, right, there's the answer of, hey, I wouldn't change anything, right? I wouldn't
Oh,
change
that's
anything
actually
because,
become a very popular political thing right now, by the way.
right, because people they
It's all
go,
good.
hey, without all those mistakes, I wouldn't be the person I am today, and I wouldn't
Right.
have led the business and done all these things, which is true, But if you had, 5 minutes with your previous self, and you could just say, hey, just a couple pointers, like a parent to a child, or an older sibling to a younger sibling. You know what I mean? We all
Hmm.
have actual things, actual things like, hey, just don't waste, you're going to end up wasting tons of time with that. Don't do that and just do this, you know? So many, I've like so many little details, little things that I was like, oh, I wish somebody would have mentioned that to me. Right. I think first one that comes to mind is actually focusing on, we kind of talked a little bit about it on earlier, but focusing on one thing, like trying to be like the idea that if you are everything to everyone, then it means that you're not taking a stand, you're not standing for who you actually are, right? Because you're trying to like almost like fit yourself into all these different things. Like, oh yeah, we could do that very well. Oh, we do this very well as well. Like you don't actually take a stand and believe in what you're doing, right? And that's why it's at least for me, like that was something that I couldn't let go of, right? And so
Excuse me.
focus at getting very, very clear and focusing on one thing, doing one thing very, very well. Like right now, we have a lot of different ads, but we have one ad channel, Meta, that we're mastering. We have one marketing funnel, not five, not three. This is what I used to do back in the day. We had this funnel over here, this funnel over here. We had this way of getting referrals, and all these different offers, all these different services. One channel, one funnel. We have one business, one agency, right? For people that aren't qualified to work with us or what have you. We put them on a list, but we have ways of kind of making sure they're getting value out of it, but we don't say yes to working with them. Essentially, we have one team, right? It doesn't mean that this is the only thing I do. There's other, call it businesses that are not the main business, but I've made it very clear that this is the main focus, for at least myself. And I think that would have been very helpful at a young age to just be able to hear that, because I've made so many, I feel like I've maybe not wasted time is the right, way of looking at it, but it's wasted effort, right? You know how like in business, it's like ROI. I still think about this a lot because ROI is one aspect of it, right? Return on investment. If I invest, whatever it is, 10,000 a month, 20,000 a month on ads, what's our return? Are we getting a more than, one or two or whatever your metric would be in terms of ROI, return on investment, right? But there's a big aspect of this where I think I spent a lot of time on effort. I spent a lot of time on doing things the hard way, right? And I think it could be from my upbringing, my parents, immigrants to into Canada. It was a big thing that I saw them do as a growing. I think if you're a child of an immigrant, you kind of get it in the sense that you just see your parents working hard, more hours, more effort, right? And in business, it's not necessarily always that. In fact, most, there's a saying, it's like the lazier you are, if you want to be, it's kind of like, it's like if you're lazy, you're going to be, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's like the lazier you are, the more successful you're going to be. Right. And so if you're,
that's the first time I've heard that, Jay.
is it really? There's a saying I was trying to get to where it's like the lazy person is definitely going to be, or they're going to be a millionaire, but the person that's incapable of doing most things, they're going to be a billionaire. And it's because they don't have that thing. I had to overcome. I'm still kind of overcoming this myself, where I could do it. I could learn it. Right. It's that concept of who, not how. You know what I mean? And so the lazy person would go, okay, let me learn the bare minimums and let me like find the right people at the right point. Someone that's not capable of doing it would never think that, right? So I think of like Richard Branson in that category, right? Where he doesn't know the ins and outs of running the airline or what have you, right? But he just has the vision, he has the idea, and he hires the right people that go and execute on it, right? And so just the closer, and it doesn't mean Richard Branson's a bad person. In fact, he's, all data points have pointed to that he's actually really caring, really great, really present with everybody that he's, ever in conversation with. But I think I was doing the opposite of that in the beginning. I put in a lot of hours, a lot of effort. And so what I wanted to say was return on effort, ROE, return on effort. That would be another thing I'd look at earlier, right? On top of the focus aspect, which is, could I get more how do I get more, not necessarily myself, not by putting in more effort or more hours, but how do I get more through a different channel? Whether
Yeah.
it's hiring on the right people or delegating quicker. These are all things that I really struggled with in the beginning.
Yeah, you're going to spend a lot of time working really, really hard. I think no matter who you are, no matter what vertical you're in, I think what you're really saying is when you're putting in all that effort, putting it in the right buckets and in the right places. Um, because I'm sure that Richard Branson, for example, probably works 7 days a week, 18 hours a day, but his productivity output and his ability to put that effort in the right buckets is probably pretty profound, in terms of and which is why you're able to maximize and do really big things, right?
You're 100% right. It doesn't mean that they're not working hard, but it's this idea that they're working in their own genius, their own unique ability of it,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like those 17 hours in your unique ability, those are not normal 17 hours. It's not 17 hours of cleaning the house or something, or gardening or a different, thing that you might be doing in your day to day, but it's 17 hours in your unique ability, what you're uniquely gifted to do, you
Yeah.
know? And that's really the funny part too. I remember reading Tim Ferriss' 4 Hour Work Week, which I think so many people it kind of created this whole revolution on people building these digital businesses and things like that. But if you know Tim, or if you read many accounts on him, Tim is not working a 4 hour work week.
Right.
He's working like a crazy 60 to 80 hour output, maybe not as much these days, right? But it's also in doing what he loves to do most.
Yeah. Yeah, without a doubt. I remember reading an article too about just about the most successful people in the world, and one of the interesting little tidbits was they interviewed. It was a New York Times article or something like that, but they interviewed at the time. This is before he was ever a president. They had interviewed like Trump. They had interviewed, I think like Bloomberg, and it was like a list of kind of who's who of like very successful people, and they were trying to find like commonality among just like traits that they all seem to have in common. And one of the odd things that came out of it, Branson might have even been one of them too. One of the odd things that came out of it was like nobody slept more than 5 hours a night. They all
Oh,
slept
that's
between
good.
four. They all slept between 4 to 5 hours a night. And I know, like, because I'm trying to be physically fit and like do the right thing, and you talk to a trainer, a nutritionist, like read up on like good health. And one of the top things everybody says is sleep at least 8 hours a night. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
well,
yeah.
except for the most successful people in the world, which apparently don't sleep very much. So, in any event, but let me ask you this: in your career so far in building your business, again, I love talking about reflection.
Yeah.
Are there people in your life that when you look back, you think made a fundamental difference? Mentors, maybe that you had along the journey that really kind of like maybe altered the course of where you might have been versus where you are now?
I mean, so many. I think that's been one of the best gifts that podcasting gave me those early years, was that I could bring on, forget the credibility and the authority that one has with a podcast, forget all that. But for me, starting out, I made it very intentional to bring on people that I got a lot from reading their books or doing their training programs or what have you. So people like a Bob Proctor or Jack Canfield. We had Tom Bilyeu on the show, Patrick Bet David. These are all bigger names now as they've built up their audiences and their businesses. But each conversation was kind of like a conversation with a mentor in a way, you know? Um, and I certainly wouldn't be where I'm at now without some of those conversations. But also, I think back to, mentors have made the biggest, like, I think it's like the secret to life, really. In a lot of ways, it's how quickly you could find good mentors, like genuine mentors that are in your corner, that could just reflect back to you from like where they've been, and just been able to open doors and connect me to, different people. Chris Thompson from Student Works Painting comes to mind as a mentor when I was starting out in university. That's when we had met, but without some of his guidance and kind of like lessons, but they weren't lessons. I think from lessons from a mentor, they're always like in conversation. It's
Yeah.
more like, let me show you how to do something and not like teach you how to do it. If
Yeah.
that always feels a little bit like that. Um, Now Chris has gone on to, they've been running the same business for 30 plus years. Um, you know 30, 40 million, from a top line perspective, very, very successful, has made a massive impact with a lot of university students. um, Stephanie Joanne is another person that comes to mind. She was the first person that really, it wasn't just about understanding online marketing, but it's about that last part, which is the executing on the actions that you need to be taking on. Without her, I probably would have not generated anywhere close to the millions that we've generated online through online marketing and funnels. And so, I mean, there's so many more, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, mentors, and I just think it's just been an amazing journey to be able to have some of these people, in my life, and they're still present. And so that's always great.
Yeah, that's very cool. Well, listen, one of the reasons why I named the podcast Fingerprints on Success is I love to talk about entrepreneurs and the people that had their fingerprints literally on the success of other people, which I don't often even say about like why I came up with the name the way I did, but that at its heart, it's really I love to hear those stories. And I think it's also so cool that mentors can come in all different ways, shapes, sizes, people from all different areas, and you never know who's going to make a huge impact on you. And it's funny, it made me think about like right now in it's the fall and it's the World Series, which of course just ended last night as we're recording this. And it made me think about my little league baseball coach, who was a great mentor. And here I am, 52 years old. It made like a huge impact on me. And I was just laughing to myself while watching the game, because one of the things for people who are baseball players is when you're at bat, you always have to look at the third base coach after every single pitch. Like, do they want you to take a pitch? Do they want you to swing away? Are the runners going to be running? Like, what's going to happen? And I can remember being up with like 2 outs in the bottom of the last inning with bases loaded in a game. I was like 15 years old, and I had been trained by this guy, like all the things you have to do, and he taught you about hard work and fundamentals. Talked about fundamentals earlier, and all these great things, but always looking for the sign after every pitch. And I never forget, I looked to my left for the sign and I got 2 strikes on me. And he goes, well, there's like a couple hundred people there or whatever. And he goes, what the hell are you looking at me for? You need to get a hit. And, but what's funny? That little lesson, like about like just knowing when you have to step up and you have to deliver, and, no one's going to coach you through it or whatever. Like, that was one little lesson, and it was just fresh on my mind with the World Series and everything. You're talking about your mentors. I'm thinking about mine too, which was fun. So, but listen, Jay, one thing that I'm curious about right now is what has you excited, right? You're building a business that's been very successful. And, I know from talking to you a lot that you've got high energy and you're always plowing forward and trying to create, new and interesting aspects of your business. And I know you're involved in other verticals as well. Like, what's got you jumping out of bed in the morning, super excited about the future?
You know, I think it's in the beginning of this interview, we kind of talked how I started, right, in podcasting and all these different, blogging, videos, and what have you. I think for me, what's been really more exciting outside of like just the business aspect of it is this. It's kind of like a resurgence of creativity, you know? And Julia Cameron has a really great book on this called The Artist's Way. And in that book, in the first couple like chapters, she talks about this idea of like a repressed creative, and this idea that when people go out into the world and, whether they're a super successful business person or a successful lawyer or management consultant or what have you, right? They have their, they kind of suppress their creativity and their imagination and what they believe is kind of possible, because it becomes it becomes these, numbers in, numbers out. You start looking at the
Right.
business and very, charts and departments and all these things. And it's been a really, that's been a very humbling side of things. But what I found that as I was growing through all that, my creativity, I felt like as a person, as a creator, or as an entrepreneur, wasn't quite, wasn't quite there. And I wasn't feeding that creative aspect of it, you know? And so a big, part, kind of like for the next, year is getting back into not just creating content, but creating content that I actually like from a creative aspect of it. So, and it's weird because it's not what we kind of preach on in a way where it's like creating content where to generate more leads and what have you. I think that's great. And I think the business does, we have components where we have that in place. But I'm talking creativity from the CEO, creativity from a human aspect of it. And one of the things that I've found to be really great at getting into that. So one, I do the morning pages that Julia Cameron recommends. Morning pages is just more of like a download of all the different ideas and things that you have that's going on in your mind, but you're just downloading. So you're writing without judgment, right? You're
Okay.
writing without, you're just trying to download because you're essentially trying to like wipe all the messiness away and let creativity flow to you, if that makes any sense. So I've been doing that a little bit more recently, and one of the other things as well is I've been running again, and running was one of these things where it was kind of like a meditation for me, like an active meditation. I don't run very fast, but I sign up for tons of these half marathons and going to do a first marathon next year,
Cool.
where you run kind of at a slow pace. Like that's actually most of the training, So when I say running, I'm not saying sprinting, you know. But it's been a really great form of meditation for me, and I've been feeling that creative muscle kind of come back. Tons of ideas, kind of like when you're in the shower, you get tons of creative ideas, like many people do. And
Right.
so running has been great to kind of feed into that. And so my team and I have been working on, you know, I don't know if I could, let's just say we're working on a creative project for me as we speak. We've been seeing some of the first drafts and things that are coming through. It's not a book;
Okay.
it's going to be through video, and
So,
I
so
think,
this is under the heading of stay tuned. Not a spoiler alert yet, but stay tuned.
yeah, and I do think we're going to just be publishing and just be showing a different side, a more kind of behind the scenes human side of the business and what have you. And I think regardless if you do it for the business or for yourself, I think my reasoning for doing it this time is actually a lot better because I'm doing it for myself, like selfishly, you know, as opposed to like doing it for a business lead generation type of reason. I
Yeah.
think you can have both, right? But I think for me that's just been one thing that I've been neglecting a little more over the last couple years and just excited to kind of get back in that.
It's awesome. Hey, listen, I just want to thank you. Normally at the end of a show, I'll say, "Oh, thanks for coming on the show." But in your case, I have to not only say, "Hey, Jay, thanks for coming on the show," but also, how about like, thanks for helping me create Fingerprints on Success? Because without you and your help and your team from Podcast Your Brand, none of what I've been able to do would have been possible because there's absolutely no way I could have gotten to this point without the incredible job and help that you provided. So not only thank you for being on and being a guest, but thank you for helping me create the show.
Well, Bill, it's been an absolute pleasure, and it continues to be an honor and a pleasure to kind of chat with you, to watch you creatively express more of who you are, and just even being in this conversation with you has been so fun. So hopefully the listeners got a couple ideas from it.
Thank you.